Welcome. As many of you listening to this program are probably aware, this summer over 130 courageous funders shared examples of their grant applications with the Technology Association of Grantmakers, also known as TAG, as part of their involvement with the Fix the Forum campaign with Grant Advisor. TAG went on to analyze these forms to determine the level of overlap between questions and recently took a deeper dive into this research. I want to welcome Chantal Forster, the Executive Director at TAG, and Kwame Porter Robinson, the data scientist who analyzed these forms to discuss their latest findings. But before we get started, I was hoping that maybe Chantal, you could give us a little bit more about personal background and kind of some explanation of how TAG came to be involved with the Fix the Forum campaign.
I'm happy to. It's great to be here. Davis, how old school do you want to go?
As far back as you think is relevant, because I think this is a long-standing conversation for sure.
I think caring about the relationship between technology and people started really early for me. My father was a computer scientist actually at the steel mills on the southern part of the Great Lakes. And he actually brought me into the mills. He brought me into the steel mills, into the blast oxygen furnace. I could see how liquid iron was being made into steel. I saw the people working in those mills. And while he was automating and writing software to improve safety and automation in those mills, I learned really early by visiting and being in the process that you can't separate the social from the technical. You really cannot separate people's everyday work with the tools that we build to support them. And so I went on to have a 20-year career focused on human-centered design, user-driven experience, on software, higher education, nonprofit sector. And you develop an eye for problems with an easy technical fix. If, the kinds of things that if only you listened better and cared more about actually addressing them, you could apply some relatively simple fixes. Like at one point I was working as a consultant for the largest school district, one of the largest school districts in the US. And there was a school transfer form that was not online. Once a year, parents waited hours in line to be the first in line to request a transfer for their student. And so at one point you say, well, why don't we just automate this? Why don't we put this online and make people's lives easier? And so we did, saving hours for parents who frankly didn't want to be taking a day off to wait in person in line for a transfer form. So I think that Fix the Form was one of these challenges. The research they conducted was something that I saw, that TAG saw, and I knew our members, being problem solvers and innovators, that we'd want to lend our voice and lend our effort to addressing what Fix the Form uncovered.
You're making me think, as a parent, even though the forms are online, there's still a bit of a burden. They need to do some more listening, but maybe elaborate a little bit more about kind of the specific needs and the specific problems that the Fix the Forum movement is trying to address for the field and who the stakeholders are in that movement.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to claim credit for Fix the Forum. It is not my work. It's the work of grantadvisor.org. Fundamentally, I think this work is about answering the call for change by the people we serve as grant makers, because the overhead for that grant making process is huge. I don't know if you've ever looked at some of the reviews on grantadvisor.org, but the reports indicate that some grant applications take 23 hours for a single app. Some are 32, even 48 hours for a single grant application. That's unfunded work. It's considered operational overhead, and it's done without any guarantee of a grant. So the Fix the Form campaign was really designed to address the top problems in that grant application process based upon a survey of about 500 nonprofits. And this work was led by Kari Anastad and Laura Solomons of grantadvisor.org. TAG was just a partner here. We came in, realized that their campaign, we came in support of that campaign to help amplify the message, but then also to do a bit of research to address an open question for the sector around wasteful overlap, existing overlap between grant applications that funders use. So TAG and Grant Advisor collected 133 grant forms. And then we brought in Kwame Porter Robinson here, one of the best data scientists I know in our sector, to conduct some pretty sophisticated data analysis to determine how many of those questions are shared amongst funders. really to answer the question, how much do we already have in common? And what can we then do about it?
It's courageous work for sure, on all parties involved. So maybe, Kwame, let's switch over to you and talk a little bit about what the research did unearth and sort of what are the implications that we're thinking for the field.
Sure. I think for me, the biggest takeaway was that the work of answering questions not only was unfunded, but occurred very often. The top two themes, what a nonprofit does and their plan for the requested funding, were reflected in a large majority of form questions. So every form or every funder cares about this, but that's just one example, and it might be possible to do this elsewhere. I think in terms of like an implication, there's a real opportunity to follow the less is more principle. By simplifying this kind of transactional application work, we create more space for the day-to-day nonprofit work and relationships that we all want to fund.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking actually earlier to your point, Chantal, about 36 hours as somebody who does some grant application writing. I can tell you that's sort of conservative. I have been known to spend over a week preparing a grant application. So, Kwame, your findings are definitely in line with even my personal experience. So Kwame, just tell us a little bit more. Was there anything unexpected? I mean, that was a lot of data you were working with. Anything that surprised you?
Yeah, certainly. I think you could tell that funders were indirectly already thinking about grant similarity, at least from a legal perspective, because so many questions in corporate structure and nonprofit governance were very similar, and everyone asked them. In terms of data and process, for me, it was really interesting pushing up against the limits of a purely quantitative similarity approach, and then having the opportunity to consider a mixed method approach to go beyond that. So, for example, many machine learning models have pre-existing racial bias within them, and a mixed method approach was especially important to move past that. In our case, we use a data triangulation approach to develop emergent meaning using top-down and bottom-up summarization to capture so much of what the funders were asking.
Wow, thank you so much. And I feel like the results of this are definitely all in the report, and you can review that in more detail in terms of the findings, as well as with the blog. So before we part ways, I feel like this is all a part of a larger call to action for the field. And Chantal, maybe close us out with some parting thoughts about, like, if you read this, what's one thing that a foundation could do to start to move and make some real change around this topic?
You know, well, I'm a pragmatist about these kinds of questions. And so, I'll say this. If we really care as a sector, if we really care as funders about building trust and building relationships, as Kwame said earlier, it is our responsibility to use modern tools and technology to deal with these impediments like manual and repetitive grant forms. I mean, it's our responsibility. If not us, then whom? And to do this so that we can focus on the human and relational part of social change. I think of this as really the thoughtful use of technology to streamline actually enables space and time for a more humane philanthropy. So I would encourage folks to take these results, share them with their organization, and talk about them across organizational silos, programs, IT, admin. Bring folks together to talk about what these mean, the implications for your org, and what you can do about it. Join us then on January 26th for an event that TAG will be holding to discuss the findings and explore what we can do as a sector.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for this courageous research. And I think, bottom line, it sort of feels like it's the right thing to do now. We have technology. There was a time when we only had paper and we only had stamps, and then we had computers, and then we had the internet. And now we have ways to make things really much more efficient and much less burdensome on our nonprofit partners. And so, I think this is research that's underpinning stuff that we already knew, but in many ways didn't have the data to move the conversation forward. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. And we look forward to seeing you on January 26th.